All right, so we are coming back after the weekend. It is February 24th, it's a Monday, and we are going to be turning in our proving grounds today. Remember, proving grounds have very specific rubric requirements, so even though they're not worth a lot of points, only 1.5 points, you want to get all of those points. You want to meet all parts of the rubric, right? And the rubric isn't always about how clean the artwork looks. It's just about matching certain requirements through the process. This is about learning how to think through something fully, especially this proving ground, which is all about making sense of the data and recognizing patterns and understanding what it is you're working with. So last class, we gave this a start, and we're going to continue it today. We cleaned up our assignment 1 and assignment 2. It's a great opportunity to improve both of those. And then we placed our creature from assignment 2 into our landscape from assignment 1. And then we started playing with sizing it and placing it. And we used puppet warp to pose it so that its anatomy matched the angle of your environment, right? That's an important one. Then we just did basic color and lighting corrections using the direct adjustments we always use, which are levels, color balance, and hue saturation. Now we're going to get into the specific lighting using dodge and burn and tools, matching kind of lighting direction, matching shadows, and then building atmosphere. So that's what's left. Big picture. Once we turn in Proving Ground 1, we start our final compositing project, which is a time-based animation project, right? So I'll be introducing that at the end of today's class. And we're also going to do a presentation critique for Proving Ground number 1, where you get to answer a question about either your creature composite or your setting or what you think is most believable and how you've put them together. But looking ahead, we're going to be working on assignment 3, animation, for several class periods, right? And it will be due right before we leave for spring break on March 5th, right? So that will be our last big assignment before spring break. And then right before spring break, we'll start in vector projects. We'll get introduced just so you can play with some vector programming over the break. We have this site, which is vector.com, which is a freeware version of, it's not really a clone of Illustrator, but it allows you to use anchors and create vectors like we do with Adobe Illustrator. So that will be a big shift for us. Spring break's kind of the natural divider between all the pixel stuff we're doing, the last of which will be animation, and the vector stuff will start after spring break. So there's a lot more to come. I'm going to close this for now, and we're going to go to our folder, close these, open up my main folder, and then go to Proving Ground 1 in progress. And then I'm going to open up my Photoshop file. Photop, our freeware clone, has been spotty of late in terms of its access. It looks like it was last accessible at 5 a.m. this morning, so they're doing definite things to their servers because it's just not loading right now. We're having that problem on Wednesday as well. So I will ask you to try to use Photoshop this morning for this, even if you usually use the freeware, right? And then hopefully it will be available to you when you need it on your own. We are lucky to have Photoshop here. I was also going over with students, if you want freeware versions of Photoshop, a lot of them are available to download on your computer. So GIMP is probably the longest standing one that has almost all of the tools that we'll be using this semester, right? It won't have some of the animation tools that we'll use in the next assignment, but neither does Photop, right? Then these others like Krita, Inkscape, Canva, they have some of the same features, but not the same layout, not the same kind of interaction. But I definitely could recommend GIMP, whether you're on a Mac or on a PC. You can actually download that to your computer. It's freeware. It's been around since the 90s and has a lot of fans. So you don't need to rely on a browser connection, an internet connection. The reason we don't use it in the class here is because you have to download it to a computer, and you're not always working on computers where you have administrative access, right? Whereas Photop you can use on any computer, in the library, anywhere where you have an internet connection. All right, so the next thing we're going to do we have our creature. We've decided on its hero placement and its hero pose. And we can alter that, right? So if I wanted to play with this pose a little bit more, we went over how to do this. I make a duplicate, and then I use Edit Puppet Warp. And you can also do this in Photopea, but it's very slow processing in Photopea. So you want to make sure you don't have anything else open. Okay, Puppet Warp changes my clean cutout creature layer into a polygon wireframe, and then I pin it where I want it to stay. And then I'm just going to try raising its head up. So I'm going to pin it at the back of the neck. I'm going to pin it at the collarbone. And then I'm going to pin it at the beak so that I can rotate the head up. Right. And maybe I like that. Maybe I want it up higher, like it's raising its head to the sun. I kind of like that it's overlapping with the tree a little bit more that way. I could also pin it here. You see how all those are kind of folding on themselves? So if I pin it there, then that will stay a little bit more full. But if you create too many pins, then there's no kind of structure to it anymore, and it gets really loose. I can also lengthen the neck a little bit, right? Like stretch him. And then that will compress the body because I pinned it at the feet. I can bring the chest up. It's like kind of breathing, right? I like how it looks like he's tapping his toe as I do that. So all these different points of movement are something you can use. I always do it on a duplicate so I can see what it was like before. And I think I want something in between those two, to be honest. So I'm going to create a duplicate, Command J, and then I'm going to say Edit Puppet Warp. It's a great thing to practice with before we start animating, because this can be a really useful tool for animation. And then I pin it, especially at the feet. I'm even going to pin the toes so it doesn't tap its foot anymore. And then I'm just going to raise it a little bit. And then tuck it down here a little bit as it raises. Now there's a few reasons to make that decision for me. It's just so the head is more nicely framed. That was a little too much. And this is a little too little. But sometimes little distortions can happen. So you notice how his beak got a little bent there. So we can always trim and modify our creature. So I have a 0 pixel feather here. I'm going to do a 1 pixel feather and just trim it out to round out that beak. Not on my hero asset, right? Which I marked green. But on this one I'm actually using. And then I can delete these other options that I rejected. I'm going to mark this one blue. That's the one I'm actually using. Okay. Now, we've already played with the direct adjustments, the levels, the color balance, the hue saturation. And so, though I think it's a little bright, it works. I can, now that I've changed the pose, I could change the placement slightly, like I want maybe his tail to overlap with that tree trunk a little bit more, and I like how this is all working now. And so now I look where the feet are, and I see I have that little patch of grass. This is kind of good review. That patch of grass I can move, and I can use to kind of put between the toes, so that's sitting. I can even duplicate that and use it in other places as well. I can flip it, Command T, so it doesn't look too copy-pasty, though we're getting really, really detailed here. I can warp it. I can flip it. I can erase away from it. But the bottom line is, I want to make those feet look like they are in the grass, right? And then I can even take my eraser with a lower opacity and slowly reveal a little bit of the toes underneath that grass. But what we don't have is we have a shadow for the tree here. We don't have a shadow on the grass for the creature. So I'm going to show you how we now control the lighting direction, both on the creature and on the environment, so that we can make that match. And for this, we use dodge and burn. But I don't want to dodge and burn my actual creature. I don't want to dodge and burn the actual pixels of my landscape. Because as the creature moves or animates, those shadows also have to move and animate. So we don't want to make permanent shadows that when the creature is not there, the shadows are there. So what we do is we're going to learn a form of non-destructive editing here. And it's an interesting process, and it's new. So the first thing we're going to do is on the very top layer of your composite for Proving Ground 1, I want you to create a new layer. You do that with a little post-it note in the bottom of the layer window, and then you're going to fill that new layer with middle gray, something we usually do behind our work. So fill with 50% gray. All right, now what we're going to do is anything we want to dodge and burn. Remember, burn makes things darker. I'm going to use my tablet, so I have pressure sensitivity. I'm going to use an exposure rate of less than 30. Think of that as the strength. I'm going to do it to the midtones, and I'm going to do it with a large, soft brush, just like blending. But any shadows I want to create, I can burn on this layer, like this, and layer them up. And then any highlights I want to create, I can dodge in the same way. Make it a little bit bigger. So if there's like sun hitting mountaintops, I can put highlights on that side of the mountaintop. Now, this is what it looks like. But the way you'll actually do it is you're going to set your gray layer to what's called overlay mode. And when you do it to overlay mode, that means you get to dodge and burn. Like right now I'm dodging, I'm adding light to these mountains. Maybe to this tree. See the light hitting it? Maybe even to my creature. And then I can burn it. Put the shadow underneath my creature. Put the shadow on the ground. But not on the rocks in the foreground, right? Put the shadow on the underside. Knock down these highlights a little bit. But when I turn it off, they're all gone. So all those dodging and burning steps I just did, if I put it to normal mode, it would look like that. That's where I darkened it, that's where I lightened it. But when you set it to overlay, overlay ignores middle gray, and then it darkens anything that's darker than middle gray, and it lightens everything that's lighter than middle gray. And this is why I love doing this non-destructive technique, is I always tend to overdo it. So let me continue to overdo it. And I'm going to dodge the top of these trees a little bit so they really catch the light. Now what doesn't work in this form of non-destructive editing is because it's just a grayscale layer, I can't desaturate or saturate, right? Because there's really nothing to saturate. So I can't use sponge tool. I can only use lighter or darker. But we'll learn how we can play with the saturation because these trees are still a little too toxic. Okay, now because it's on its own layer, like maybe I hit a little bit on top of the grass there and on these rocks with the dodge into the foreground. And because it's outside, it's pretty forgiving. But now I can play with the opacity of that. So if I have it at 0, it's like I didn't do any dodge and burn. But if I do it a little bit higher, it's a lot cleaner. So that's just the simplest way you can do what's called